When we talk about embodied carbon, natural building materials can have a giant benefit. The reason being, like for instance, in hemp's case, you grow a field of hemp, you trap a bunch of carbon as that plant grows. That during photosynthesis, you're turning carbon dioxide into the carbon that makes up the plant. And if you take that carbon and then you trap it in a building, you have prevented that carbon from re-releasing back into the environment.
That's Jake Waddell, founder of the Hemp Building Institute. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. Hello there, my name is Eric Herlock, and today we're going to hear my conversation with Jake Waddell. Since 2018, Jake has sort of been at the epicenter of U.S. hemp construction, helping to bring legitimacy, data, and building code recognition to the natural material space. We talk about his role in getting Appendix BL across the finish line. We talk about the $6 million EPA grant that got axed in the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. And we talked about why environmental product declarations may determine the future of sustainable construction. All that and more on today's show right after these messages. Today's episode is brought to you by Americhon Cast Hemp from here in Pennsylvania. Americhon is one of the leaders in Hemp-Lime construction here in the U.S. They use the E-Reezy spray applied system developed in France by Damien Baumer. Americhon is revolutionizing the way houses are built. Learn more at americhon.com. This week's show is also brought to you with support from HEMI, the Hemp Education and Marketing Initiative. HEMI's mission is to accelerate the growth of the industry through leadership and market awareness of hemp products and solutions. Find out what the goodness of hemp can do for your business at hempinitiatives.org. Okay, so we've got a nugget of hemp news here for you this second week of November 2025. This one comes to us from hemptoday.net. They've got lots of great international hemp news over there, so be sure to check out our friends at hemptoday.net. This story comes to us from New Zealand. In New Zealand, fiber materials company Rubisco is relocating its hemp decortication line from Christchurch to Ashburton on the South Island, part of a broader plan to streamline logistics and expand production capacity. Backed by agribusiness giant Carfields, Rubisco says the move puts processing closer to the hemp fields that supply the company, cutting transportation costs and emissions while improving efficiency. CEO Guy Wills called the shift practical and forward-thinking, saying proximity to growers and increasing demand for low-carbon fibers will help Rubisco scale up and keep innovating. The new Ashburton facility is expected to be operational by early 2026. All right, New Zealand, yeah. If anyone is listening out there and they have an idea of how to get me to New Zealand, please reach out. Can you take a road trip if you need a boat? I think we need a boat trip. Anyway, I'll have a link to this story and to our sponsors on the show page for this episode at lancasterfarming.com. So now we're going to hear my conversation with Jake Waddell from the Hemp Building Institute. Jake Waddell is a materials engineer who left a career in the automotive industry to focus on environmental solutions, and he found his way to hempcrete. Since 2018, he's played a major role in building the U.S. hemp construction movement from the ground up. He helped lead the effort to get Hemp-Lime approved in the International Residential Code. He founded the Hemp Building Institute to advance research and standards, and now he works on large-scale projects like New York's hemp-based insulation study. Jake Waddell, welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me back. It's been a while. I've seen you around, but we just haven't been in this room talking.
Yeah. Well, I guess we saw each other most recently in Minnesota a few weeks ago.
Yeah, at the Lower Sioux. That was an amazing event. I could probably talk for an hour on my thoughts about it, but we'll just leave that for later.
Yeah, in my mind, I'm still in Chansiape. Anyway, why don't you give us a quick introduction?
My name is Jake Waddell, or Jacob Waddell, depending on, I guess, government talk or not. I'm a material science engineer. I'm really just trying to dedicate my life to trying to help the environment. And I decided that the best way for me to help the environment was trying to forward natural building materials, initially hempcrete. But now it's kind of expanded outside of that just because we need to do stuff to save the world at this point.
There you go. Well, I'm glad you're on the path that you're on. You've been at the center of the U.S. hemp building movement for years. When you look back at when you started in 2018, what did hempcrete in America look like compared to now?
In 2018, there wasn't really an established industry. There had been a number of buildings that were constructed. There were a number of enthusiasts that had seen this technology and wanted it to move forward. I myself, that's how I started experimenting in my garage, hemp and lime, trying to make it do different things, because I'm a material scientist. So I was like, I don't just want to follow the formula. I want to experiment with that formula to see what I can do. But when it got down to it, there was no market, no industry. And that's where I started. That's where a lot of people, anyone that started in the late teens, definitely came into it. And now we have codes. We've had a lot of progress and movement into making it more of a realistic prospect rather than just a really good idea.
All right. Well, the IRC Appendix BL for Hemp-Lime was a huge milestone. And for people who only sort of half understand what that means, what has changed once that code language was approved? And you were, heavily involved in that.
So I think it legitimized us in a lot of people's eyes. Almost everybody, the permitting process, for those that are not familiar, really it becomes a regional decision, a decision made by a single permitting officer or a group of individuals. So if you come at them with a fantastic idea and concept, they are very likely just to kind of breeze it past unless you find the right person. When we had codes, we then had, oh no, the International Code Council, which releases this, heard this idea, agrees with this idea enough to make it an appendix with specific rules for it. And that legitimized us in a lot of people's eyes and made it more of a realistic process.
Okay. Now, those international residential codes, that's not law. It's not like you have to follow the recommendations, but then what, every state has to further approve them, or how does that work?
Okay, so the International Code Council, historically speaking, in the 60s and 70s, was a separation of three groups, and these groups created model codes. Then they united and created the International Code Council. So these are groups that create model codes for the United States. Within the United States, every jurisdiction has the authority to determine what's permitted and what's not. Now, it's easier to go off model codes than it is to come up with your own codes in every jurisdiction. Now, every state's different. Certain states, it's a statewide code. Certain states, it's every municipality. There's certain regions and jurisdictions that almost have no codes at all. So it's not uniform in any way. But the vast majority, align with one level of the International Residential Code. Often it's not necessarily like 2024 was the last one that was released. There may be jurisdictions like I think Tennessee for the most parts, like in 2018. So that's how it works. Every jurisdiction gets to decide. So for our case, because we have this appendix, getting each jurisdiction to accept the appendix and put it into their codes is a big step, and really it's kind of the next step on that path.
And out in Minnesota last month, we heard from a trio of architects from Minnesota, right? And they got those appendices approved by the state of Minnesota, right? Do you want to talk anything about the work that they did there?
Absolutely. So there's two examples that I know of for sure, which is Austin, Texas, and now Minnesota. The Minnesota is a good example of what they did was they got both the straw bale and the hemp appendix assigned. They had to make small modifications to the appendices to have them adopted in their state. I think in their case, it was like a higher space between the bottom of the plaster and the ground level. In the codes, it's 8 inches. I think they might have gone up to 10 or 12 inches for snowbanks, basically. So there are things that are going to be regional that might need small modifications. And this is how they get modified, and how a group of architects with momentum and energy can get them approved or adopted.
So, what were the biggest technical or political obstacles in getting Appendix BL across the finish line, and how did you overcome those?
I think the number one difficulty is understanding of what it is. There can be opinions on how it's proper to do things. That is not what a code is supposed to tell you. A code is supposed to tell you the rules by which you will be measured by someone checking off and approving the building you're building. So that was a beginning of the confusion or thing we had to understand was this is not a situation of where we're telling people this is your mix ratio, this is the materials you have to use. It was more explaining how we define things.
Okay,
and
so not
these are
not best practices.
It is not a best practices. So that is, I guess, a first understanding level step we had to make. Then beyond that, there was conflicting push and pull, mostly with people that wanted to be more cautious, and maybe more people that wanted to be more open with how the code was written, and trying to draw the best line there so that we both were putting something out that was safe, but it wasn't restricting progress of the industry.
Who were your constituents that you were working with? Like, you talk about sort of like the group of people that you brought together to make this happen.
So, small group. The first three people was Mary Dempsey from Impactful Ventures. She's huge on organization, keeping us in line, and she's kind of the backbone of how we kept momentum and kept things rolling. And then Kiko Thabeau, he's an architect based in like Massachusetts area, but originally from Haiti. He is French speaking, and he had gone to school in the Constrée des Chanvres in France. And so he had the connection with the whole French community. And so he was bringing in a lot of information that we needed from that group. And I can't speak French, neither could anyone else in the group. So that was crucial in us communicating and getting that feedback from the one country that already had established rules.
Right, because they've been building with hempcrete for decades, right?
Yeah, I think it's about 40 years. Yeah. So that was the primary three, and then we brought on the code writers who had developed the code for I think it was straw bale, light straw clay, Adobe, and I think they did tiny homes too. But they had 3 to 5 codes they had already written, and we really wanted to just duplicate kind of what had been done with straw bale, just with our details, because that had successfully moved through, and we were going to use that template. So that was Martin Hammer and David Eisenberg, the best in this world that I know of, and are consistently the ones that show up and are producing to advance the codes for natural building solutions. Later on, we brought on Anthony Dente with his structural engineering specialty. And then we had 3 specialists kind of in areas. We had Cameron McIntosh talking about spray applied systems. We had Matt Marino talking about panel systems, and we had Gary Fox talking about blocks. Now, even though they were specializing, they were also listening to all the other code stuff too. So they were another set of ears. And we basically just had them when it came to right apart sort of time period that they focused on their sections.
Cool. Sounds like you had a really amazing team. It's incredible what you can do with synergy, right?
Yeah, synergy, and most of this, 90% of this activity was volunteer. So it's synergy, and it's also dedication to believing that this is important and that I am going to put my time in for this. So everyone in that group, I guess the consultants got paid, but except for them was volunteering their time. So that was part of it. Knowledge, synergy, and sacrifice.
You've worked in national organizations like the US HBA and the Foundation. What did those experiences teach you about the challenges of organizing an emerging industry?
So this is a tricky place, and it's funny because as I was going through it, I have all this emotions, and I'll shorten that up in a minute. But in general, since I've left, I've met so many other people that were in a similar position. When you're dealing with nonprofit organizations or groups, it normally boils down to one or two people that are doing the majority of the work. And it's very, very difficult, very taxing, and there's a high burnout rate. It's frustrating because then these people that have dedicated this time and put this energy in, new people come in with new energy and are like, I have better ideas or different ideas. And then there's conflict, and it often leads to a change of the guard, if you will. I've seen it happen a lot, and it's, when it happened to me, I felt confused and hurt by it. But then I realized it's kind of the nature of things. And we did try to make some efforts to change that, to try to get more participation. But in the end, if it's a volunteer situation, it's like people are sacrificing their time so they could be focusing on the paying part of their career or their families or other important things that really don't need to be neglected. So it's tricky, to say the least.
And so, yeah, I mean, you were at the USHBA, and then there's been a lot of changes in leadership there. I mean, I don't follow it too closely, but it seems like there is a rotating election thing that happens. But you sort of moved on and founded the Institute, right?
Yeah. So when I was there, I didn't discuss a lot of internal politics and things because I didn't believe it was right. But this has been 3 years since I left. So I'm going to kind of just lay it out on the table. And so when I first took over the organization, there was a conflict inside, which is not unusual. The conflict was based around the creation of the U.S. Hemp Building Foundation. And when the U.S. Hemp Building Association agreed to form the U.S. Hemp Building Foundation, it appeared that some of the people, and I believe it was the majority of the people that agreed to it, thought that the U.S. Hemp Building Foundation was going to be underneath the U.S. Hemp Building Association as a 501c3 arm. When that got formed, it was formed as an independent organization. So that caused a big divide in the board and caused trouble.
What was the reasoning for needing a foundation after you already had the association?
Okay, so this gets into the whole C numbers. So 501c6 is like a trade association, which is what the U.S. Hemp Building Association is. A 501c3 is a charitable foundation organization. If you want tax-deductible donations, you need to have a C3. If you get donations in a C6, it's taxes are paid on it. It's not tax.
Okay. All right. Just needed that clarification.
That's the major difference.
Now, and since you guys were going to go out, because you're all volunteering your time, so you needed foundations, so you can raise money, so you can fund. Got it. All right.
Yeah, different operations. So anyway, so that was the first thing. I came in and resolved that issue through discussions with the current foundation, their leadership. And we got it so that the foundation was then underneath the association. When that occurred, about a month later, we realized that the initial leadership of the foundation had signed up for a fundraising program that cost like $1,300 to $1,500 a month. Not a month, sorry, a quarter. And so we didn't realize it, and it was not discussed in the handover. But came a month or two after the handover, suddenly our bank account's in the negative. And called the contractor and everything, and basically they're saying, no, you signed a year contract, there's no way getting out of this. And so it was going to leave us to be about $5,000 in the hole. And as the USHBF hadn't done anything yet, fundraising to pay off our debts for not doing something was difficult. So this is something that I didn't really talk about a lot when it happened, but I ended up getting money from my family, fundraising from them, because I just taken over this association and this foundation, and suddenly it's like we go bankrupt. And how do I deal with a bankruptcy? And and if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have had the foundation in place to fundraise the $50,000 to $60,000 we needed for the IRC 6 months later. So it was like, it ended up being very important in how everything played out. But that was something I haven't really talked about much. I just want to be open and honest with it. That's what happened. I didn't bring it up because I didn't want anyone to, quote unquote, owe me or my family for that.
But it's good to sort of shine some light on that. It sounds like it was just really stressful and confusing and more than you bargained for at the time. So it also sounds like you navigated it really well. So good job.
Thank you. Yeah. And then, and I'll just jump to me leaving now. This is just my departure out. Those were the topics that came up on my departure out. People felt like I was hiding these things. And so there was a let's say just personality conflict between some group of the leadership and myself. And they thought I was hiding these things when I was trying to just kind of move forward and keep moving forward. And they wanted to go in a different direction with the organization and have different priorities than I wanted to have. So that's why I left. And there was a lot of conflict in me when I left the USHBA because I'd spent years trying to build up the momentum and get everything going. And I still believed in it. I still believe in it. I still love the USHBA and want it to thrive. And that's why I haven't talked about this in 3 years because we didn't want to split the church, if you will, of hemp building in the country. But yeah, there was just conflicts. And like you said, these changeovers happen all the time. And it is very common, the more and more I see, that these type of stories play out in one way or another. And it's between people. It's not the organization that's a problem.
It's always the people that are the problem. They're also the solution
conflict.
too. Right. Yeah.
So then that's when I started the Hemp Building Institute and just tried to keep doing what I thought would help the industry, because I always believed in the industry. I always believe in the community that is the industry, and that I want to help it move forward.
All right. So my next question is, like, what would you do differently if you were starting a hemp building association from scratch, but you actually then did that? So, like, very briefly, what did you do differently?
Well, I mean, what I did differently was I didn't have people. That's the honest truth. Is, for one, I didn't want to like separate and destroy, what the USHBA was. So I didn't want another member organization popping up and being in existence and competing over membership.
Right.
But also that personal conflict and that stuff, it kept coming up. I mean, that was when I left, but there was personal conflict when I joined. There was personal conflict throughout the process because different opinions will come into a room, and that's democracy. But it also can be very difficult. So I wouldn't say I made a better organization. I just made one that didn't have that inherent conflict.
What was your rationale for starting the Institute?
Because there were certain tasks that needed to get done. We needed to finish off the codes. We still had another step there to get the commentary done. I wasn't sure that was going to be executed.
There over was at the HBA, because priorities had changed.
Priorities had changed, and then also right after the priorities changed, administrations changed again. Because then there was an election. Like, I think I left in November. There was another election in January. So then suddenly there was a whole new board leadership that still had to get their feet under them, and yet we needed to have the commentary done by April. And so it didn't compute how this was going to happen.
Right.
So I couldn't let that ball drop. And that was the first initial ball I had to carry.
Right. Because you had your eyes on the prize and you're like, no, we have to get these codes approved. And if you're not going to do it over here, then we're going to do it over there. So good job. Yeah. So, okay. So you were on track through the Institute for a $6 million EPA grant that ended up getting killed in Trump's big, beautiful bill. So what happened there, and what does that loss mean for the industry?
So it took a while. It takes a long time to figure out how cash is going to flow into these things. And when we figured out there was this grant opportunity and went for that as well as this NYSERDA grant, actually about the same time. I think the NYSERDA grant was written in, I helped Home Innovations Research Lab develop the proposal for the NYSERDA grant in like September 23. And then at the same time in December 23, got approached about this other opportunity. Now, I had sat through the EPA meetings discussing what would later be called the Seymour grant package, which was basically when you're dealing with environmental product declarations, there can be a disparity between the results depending on how you do your life cycle assessment. And so it is key to write product category rules to prevent those differences. So that was a big part of the Seymour grant policy and where the funding went was trying to get rid of that ambiguity and try to compare apples to apples when you're having EPDs. If not, you could have shopping around for, a better calculation. And that is greenwashing. That is not where we want to be and what we were trying to avoid and what the EPA was trying to avoid. So we applied. We focused on natural building materials. There was other groups like Concrete had their own. Basically, we were trying to create an environmental product declaration calculator to try to streamline the process, make it more accessible, make it more widely used. Had some funding that involved helping execute it in different natural building companies in our industry. And we were doing that. Concrete was doing that. Steel was doing that. American Wood Council had one. There was another group like Living Building, the International Living Future Institute, which was doing the labeling process. And there was other groups that were working on databases to make sure that we were getting all the data put in and can easily filter through it. And there was others that were just trying to get EPDs done to increase the amount of data we had. So that was the project. And like I said, we were selected for the natural building side. We were selected like in July 24. And, January 21st, there was, and one of his first executive orders was to stop anything related to the Inflation Reduction Act until it's determined whether it aligns with the policies of the incoming administration, which, since the administration has decided that climate change is not a thing, that it's the biggest hoax, that meant this project that was focused on embodied carbon didn't matter anymore. And that's what this whole project was about, was determining how to properly calculate embodied carbon in the built environment in the U.S. for policy and other decisions.
Yeah, that would be helpful to have that information, right? If climate change is indeed a thing.
Yes.
All right. Well, you were talking about the EPDs, so let's go there. So you're talking about life cycle assessments and environmental product declarations. Why do EPDs matter so much for hemp-based materials, and what's the danger if we don't get them right?
Okay. Environmental product declaration is, people talk about carbon, your carbon footprint. Carbon footprint is really a number that's commonly called global warming potential, which not only takes in carbon, but also takes in some other global warming gases. That is one of the outputs from an environmental product declaration. Environmental product declaration creates all these environmental impact lists and what they are. That comes from a life cycle assessment. So a life cycle assessment can be done in many ways. In order to try to define the ways a life cycle assessment's done, you create a product category rule. The product category rule, or PCR, is supposed to make it so you're comparing like to like, and you have less manipulation of the numbers to give yourself an advantage. And when we talk about a building, we talk about three stages of a building. One is the building itself, the construction and what goes into it. The second is the operation of the building. And the third is the end of life. The embodied carbon is that first section. And then you have operational carbon, which is the operating of the building. And then if there's any maintenance or repairs, that kind of goes into embodied carbon as well. But, like electricity and stuff like that, that's your operating carbon. And then end of life is the last stage of your life cycle of your product. And this is the life cycle assessment. When we talk about embodied carbon, natural building materials can have a giant benefit. The reason being, like for instance, in hemp's case, you grow a field of hemp, you trap a bunch of carbon as that plant grows. That during photosynthesis, you're turning carbon dioxide into the carbon that makes up the plant. And if you take that carbon and then you trap it in a building, you have prevented that carbon from re-releasing back into the environment. This is incredibly beneficial as far as sequestering carbon and lowering the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So natural building materials are big on this. Now, a problem in the current system is that the majority of the products that environmental product declarations were initially discussing were synthetically made. The math that they use, it's non-dynamic. So basically, if I put in carbon today and I take out carbon in 100 years, it's the same. And in reality, that's not the case. But if you look at like natural building materials in that formula, that means if we sequester a bunch of carbon right now and it sits in that building for 100 years, the current rules are written that at the end of that time, you have to release all that carbon back into the environment, and you then end up with a zero. Now, the reality is that by keeping that carbon out of the environment for that time period, there is a benefit. That's a dynamic effect, almost like interest being paid. That's what needs to be included or understood for us to get the full value of our materials. The reality is that we're still going to look better than other materials because where we're a zero, they were a positive. And so we don't have that. We still have the energy that went into processing and, manufacturing, but we are not negative, carbon negative, if you will. But if you include the dynamic effect and the benefit of trapping that carbon for, let's say, 60 years or 100 years, then we are carbon negative.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand, why someone would have an issue with this, right? So this EPD, it's kind of like a list of bad news, right? And if your mindset is ignorance is bliss, you don't want to see this list of bad news. So cut the grant, get this out of here. Let's not even talk about it, right? Is that why you lost the $6 million?
Yes. So they killed there was $160 million total amongst, I think, 30 something participants. And that's where that entire program was cut. Because if carbon doesn't matter, then why do we care how we calculate it?
Yeah. It's, so many frustrating questions.
Yeah. I've come to terms with it. It's tricky.
It's tricky.
Well, you see, so kind of going back to an experience and some discussions that I've had at the Lower Sioux and since being at that in that Lower Sioux Nation, when Nona LaDuke said to me in the hallway, she was like, we never depended on government funding. We did everything ourselves through our community. And, maybe that's the lesson to be learned here is, as much
people,
as
not government. Yeah.
Yeah. The government, my rough calculations was the hemp industry lost about $100 million when he came into office between the different organizations that lost money. Some of that's been brought back, so I don't know if that number's accurate anymore. But from USDA to EPA to DOE to there's a bunch of them that all took funding away from things that were helping the environment. And that was the story. And since that was the story, they did not align with the new administration's policies.
But if these things help with the economy, there's a new story, right?
Yes, actually, and that is very crucial. Is anyone that's applying to money right now in this industry, the story is America first, because that is still true, and that was always true. We wanted local economies, and that makes us a more resilient to everything. It's just the last administration cared about environment, cared about social and environmental social justice situations and issues. We had 2 other grants that were environmental justice that we didn't get selected for yet because they got canceled before they did the selection. But it's I don't know.
It's tricky. It's tricky.
It's tricky.
All right. So you were saying the word NYSERDA, NYSERDA, which is clearly an acronym that I don't understand. So tell me what that is.
Sorry. Yeah. And I guess this happens is you just start using things. USHBA, it's for like US Hemp Building Association, stuff like that, where you just kind of forget about it. NYSERDA is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. They are New York State's funding of innovative things to do for energy.
Okay.
So they have, for the last 7 or 8 years, funded a great deal of projects, and some of which have been natural building related. There was a group that I met at, the Day on the Hill or something in Washington, D.C., called Home Innovations Research Lab. They were interested in working with the hemp industry. They wanted to know what we needed to move our hemp building industry forward. And the answer was fire testing. So that's how this whole thing started. And it started as, all right, how do we get fire testing, to, well, what if we change it here and tweak it here and tweak it to their demand, like what New York State wants here and there, and now it's turned into a project that it's multifaceted. The first one is creating, it's called, the project now is called Hemp-Based Insolution for Multifamily Retrofits. New York State's ideal situation is they have existing stock of buildings that are used for affordable housing that are owned by the state, that they want to do a deep energy retrofit on. So they want to increase its ability to, lower the utility bills by increasing the insulation and things like this. So, or using different new technologies for heating and cooling and this type of stuff. So this project is comparing hempcrete blocks, hempcrete panels, spray applied hempcrete, hemp bad insulation, so that's not hempcrete, and then hemp like boards, which is, again, is long fiber stuff. So those were the 5 products that are on the list to be compared.
Okay.
We are writing a manual on how to retrofit with these, primarily in the situation where you don't displace the occupant. So that means we need to do it from the outside, more or less, so that they can still live in there when all this is happening. So these are like some different challenges here, but that's step one. Part of that step is market analysis, trying to determine why there'd be resistance to use, what would need to be done to promote use. Part of that is evaluating the materials, so that when there was a large sum of money, I think somewhere, I think north of $150,000, I think maybe $180,000 of match testing in the industry. So companies are doing like $10,000 of testing by themselves. And then USERTA will pay for another $10,000 of testing in Home Innovations Research Lab to match. And then they get access to both sets of data. So this is a way for them to get more data to publish on and discuss anonymously, so it doesn't like bring any of the companies down. But that's the policy. So we are writing a manual, have market research, have match testing that's going out to, I don't know how many companies at this point. I think there's like 7 or 8 that are involved that's still moving forward on. We're about a year into this project, but we're a year into a 1.5-year project. So it's kind of along the way. There's also life cycle assessment stuff, which I did. Basically was just a review of all the EPDs that had been done for these different hemp products and comparing them. There's also thermal analysis that's being performed, like so a thermal study to show how that does. And then with all this information from the testing, the LCAs, the thermal studies, 2 will be selected, and the input from the technical advisory group, which is made up of the industry professionals, which I think there's at least 17 people in that. And 2 of the 5 overarching products, not necessarily a specific company's products, will go through a time study, see how fast it is to install, and then compare that. And then with that data, those 2, one technique will be chosen. That technique and all of its data will then be presented to NYSERDA kind of as, this is the answer we're suggesting. If NYSERDA sees that data, compares it to the other options, and goes, yes, we want to try this, phase 2 is actually constructing,
Cool.
using that process with that material.
All right. As you were talking, I was reminded of the Project PA Hemp Home that they did here in Western PA a few years ago, where, they had a residential house and they did the retrofit. But doing it with the residents still inside sounds like an interesting challenge.
Yeah. And it's also been one of those, that's not, what we thought we were initially talking about, too. Oh, that's what we're going to have to do now. And this is, again, just kind of reacting to what NYSERDA wanted.
Right.
So it's interesting. A lot of it has to do with like layered techniques, like that we're going to be putting, basically stripping down most of the things, like instead of stripping down to the studs and infill, we're going to be stripping down to like the vapor barrier, like the weather barrier, and then putting stuff on the outside of that.
Right. Wow.
Which is a different technique than that's been used, but it's not like, seems like we're coming to an agreement on what the expectations of the performance will be with this technique. That was a major discussion for a little bit. Was like, for instance, the question of like, do we have an air gap? Now, an air gap makes sense for moisture control, but if you want the actual thermal impact, you don't want an air gap. And I believe the conclusion that we've come up with, as long as we're going like face to face with a material that can withstand the moisture transferring into it and it being stable, so we would need something like a weather barrier or something, we wouldn't have detrimental effects. So that's been a key. And then honestly, a cool project when I saw it is what Michaela Machado is doing with Old Pueblo and, building those structures, because it's kind of like that is what we're talking about doing, but she actually left an air gap there. And honestly, there's discussion about if that still might be a great thing by itself, so we don't even know if that's the answer, and we wouldn't know without proper testing. But yeah, it's kind of that concept, taking an existing building, putting a surface that it can place its weight on, and then building up from there with the blocks or the panels. Some of the things it's a little bit easier, like the bad insulation, of course, it's just lower weight.
Right.
But
all right, here's my idea for a TV show. All right, it's like one of those like home improvement shows. I go over to my mom's house and she's always watching like, they're redoing the house or something. Like, why don't we have a show where like you get your existing residential house, climate ready, future facing, and you do a TV show where you retrofit the person's house, maybe stick them out in some kind of, tiny home out in the yard while the crew comes in and they tear it down to studs, they put it up, and then who knows? It would have to be filmed over a stretch of time. But the show would be called Hemp Your Home.
I think it's possible.
I'm looking for funders.
Yeah.
No, I'm just a dreamer, and I always try to think of ways to connect, the larger story of what's happening with hemp construction, with, carbon, all that stuff, with people who are out there just living their lives, of quiet desperation. They don't even know about hempcrete houses, right? And just like a TV show handed to them, we might make it better. We wouldn't have any pot leaves or marijuana references.
Yeah. I mean, this is the benefit of start talking about natural building rather than hemp building in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Is that whole pot leaf still sneaks up on us?
Yeah, and that stigma, like it doesn't go away. Like just yesterday, I was talking to my friend from high school, his girlfriend, and she was like, "Oh, it's pot, right?" I'm like, "No, it's hemp." It's just like it's so frustrating. It's like yeah. But you've been in the bubble a long time.
Yeah, and it's an issue. And it's an issue that has led me to really, even with the Hemp Building Institute, the way our mission statement is written is natural building systems and solutions. Like it's, we're trying to find a way to get natural building materials into affordable housing. That is the main goal of the HBI. And there's still 7 years now since that farm bill. And I guess 6 or 7 years, whatever, depending on.
And they're hemp years. It's like 30 years now.
Yeah, I mean, we're having the same conversations. We're having the same issues. If you're really concerned about the natural environment and the built environment, hemp might be the best. Honestly, I don't have testing to prove that. Using any agricultural waste might work about as good, and we don't know. And if that other agricultural waste comes with less headache and cheaper, then maybe that's the direction we go. And I think eventually, if natural building really picked up, we would have the research dollars and the research concepts to compare these things and to determine how much better hempcrete is rather than other options, which, you could talk about rice hulls. Down in Mexico, Stephen Clark, what has he done? He's done agave. He's done sugarcane bagasse. There's people that have done seaweed and mud. They're blocks made out of, seaweed coming off the shore.
Why not? Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I think if our goal is to help the environment, that's the way we have to be looking at it. I love hemp. I wish hemp would work, and hemp is the first one that was proven. And any technology we're talking about right now for these other things is mostly adapted from hemp products to these other products, mainly because of the difficulty with supplying hemp.
Right. I'm reminded of what Cameron McIntosh has said, about pocketing your reverence for the plant. And he talks about it. It's like you have to be fiber agnostic, and it's like a rapidly renewable agricultural material is what we want here.
Exactly. I get list off a bunch: grass, flax, bamboo.
Right. I mean, humans have been building houses for a long time out of bio-based materials for a very long time. I think we know how to do this. I think deep inside, if we search our feelings, we're going to figure this out.
Yeah, actually, and one of the most interesting things I've seen people present on in the last couple of years has been like different cultures and like the materials they use, or historically what materials people use, and being like, yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's like you're using the stuff in your environment that often is just there naturally. And that's what you're building with. You're not shipping things halfway across the world. You're not having to synthesize something new.
For a long time, for like a lot of years, you could just exist as a human on the planet without it costing any money, right? It didn't cost you, it cost you time and labor to build a house for your family and community. But now it's like, in this part of the world, like you can't do that. You can't just exist as a free human, can you? What's up with that?
Wow,
we went there.
We do not want to start the revolution on this podcast.
No? I thought we already did.
All right. So you really want to get into this? I mean, I'm gonna be late for my next meeting, but I don't really care. So I've been really interested. God is Red is a really good book, and it's about indigenous religion. It was recommended to me when I was in Minnesota. I'm 5 chapters in right now, but the idea that we own nature and everything, this is like embedded in us culturally and religiously in a lot of ways. And this is a problem. And we need to understand that we need to work together and
we
create
belong
ecosystems.
To nature. We don't control nature. Yeah,
we don't own the place like we think we own the place. And if we keep trying to own the place this way, there will be no place.
Yeah. Pride comes before a fall. All right. Anyway, last question. If everything goes right in the next couple of years, testing, education, standards, what does success look like for hemp building in the U.S.?
All right. So I think we are making some progress on the codes. Right now, actually, next meeting, I'm talking with USHBA. We're trying to release some AIA credits to kind of really just go through the codes. If we can get that, we get that more widely adopted and accepted. The next thing, we see a reestablishment, whether it be at the federal level, the state level, or even the community level, that these things matter. Climate change is real. Embodied carbon matters. We want to stop polluting our environment, especially our local environment. We live here. Why am I destroying the land I live in? Then we see an increase in interest, and then we start seeing people starting to use these materials more widely. I have images in my head of trying to create and streamline a system that would make, affordable housing, and trying to create systems that, it's like land trust concepts where people own the building and they don't own the land. So the building itself can be relatively cheap. If you could create a building that is really relatively cheap, like if it's even just like a room or a room and a bathroom, and that is the only thing someone's trying to pay for and taking a mortgage out for, that's only like, $30,000-$40,000. And then at the end of that, they own that building, but that's all they own. And then that seems like a more of affordable opportunities situation. And if we could streamline that and build whole pockets, like communal, it would have to be communal kitchens, communal activities. This is the world I'm picturing in my head. I think number one is acceptance, adoption, and then making our competitive argument. But ideally, it's a whole neighborhoods that are rethought out and how it's done to make it so people can actually afford to live, especially people that do not already have wealth, because that's our biggest problem is wealth is established, and the way property values keep going up, the people that have property are getting richer and richer and richer and richer, and the people that don't have property are finding the threshold to get to property much, much higher.
Yeah, I hear that. Jacob Waddell, it is always great to talk to you. I know you're on to the next meeting. Thank you for spending some time with me. I appreciate the work that you do, and I really love your optimism. And yeah, go get them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And anytime you want to talk, I'm here, either on the podcast or off the podcast. Love you, Eric.
All right, there you go. That's my conversation with Jacob Waddell, founder of the Hemp Building Institute. I hope you learned a lot here. I hope this piqued your curiosity. Please come over to the show page at lancasterfarming.com to click on the links and go learn more. Okay, but that does it for me. I got to get out of here. I have work to do. I'm sure you have a ton of work to do too. So whatever you're doing, keep your hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. And yeah, let's get this done. My name is Eric Herlock. I am the senior digital editor here at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. Get a subscription to our historic newspaper. That's right, 70 years old. 70 years old. Sign up for our newsletters and read stories about agriculture. It's that easy. It's that good. You will not be disappointed. All right. Until next time, I will see you in the newspaper.
This episode of The Hemp Show was written, recorded, and produced by Eric Herlock. Mixing and mastering by Justin Berger. Music by Eric Herlock. The Hemp Show is copyright 2025 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family.